Over the past few days, I know many of you have been on edge. If you're a young adult watching this, 18 to 25, I'm not trying to heighten your fear. I want to share the truth. That emergency broadcast we all witnessed yesterday was chilling, but I'm here to tell you that the authorities are withholding the full story. It's not malicious. They're just as terrified as we are. They're petrified because they don't know what it is or how to contain it. It terrifies me too. But this phenomenon targeting young adults isn't new. It ravaged my city last spring, and it took my best friend. Those who do understand what's happening tried to silence us, to bury the truth to prevent it from spreading. I was detained for months in a shadowy facility, where they attempted to extract whatever this is from my system. Invasive procedures, probing into my very being, testing my DNA. But it's already among you, woven into the fabric of our digital lives. It's March 15th, so you're likely already experiencing its effects. It's not a physical contagion, it's far more insidious. Describing how this thing propagates without sounding completely insane is nearly impossible. This thing is going to spread. You've seen the fragmented reports, right? It's contagious, but not in the conventional sense. And it won't kill you, at least not permanently. Honestly, sometimes I wish it would just end us. I wish it ended me. Seattle, Washington was what my younger self considered a haven. Our quaint neighborhood, nestled beside a sprawling tech park, was idyllic, save for the occasional corporate espionage scare and the odd protest. I had grown up amidst innovation, familiar with the hum of progress my entire life. The sleek mirrored buildings reflecting the often overcast sky, the hushed whispers of breakthroughs in the air, the constant connectivity. It was all I'd ever known. Self-driving cars were as commonplace as bicycles, and drones buzzed overhead like metallic insects. I had known the sterile scent of server rooms and the glow of 1,000 screens. Weekends were spent exploring virtual realities, chasing digital dreams under the watchful eyes of AI. I knew the language of code, the pulse of the internet, and the subtle vibrations of a city on the cusp of the future. Presently, I suppressed a groan as my autonomous school bus took yet another jarring turn, nearly knocking me out of my seat. I was seriously questioning my decision to attend this tech symposium. Why was it so glitchy? Tilting my head against the cool, smooth surface of the smart glass window, I stared out at the cityscape, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. In the seat ahead, Clara Bellevue sneezed again, a noisy, wet-sounding sneeze, and she stubbornly refused to cover her mouth. I was accustomed to the quirks of technology, the occasional hiccup in the matrix of our daily lives. Seattle, Washington on this Wednesday, March 8, 2042, was supposed to be mild with a high of 62 and a low of 48, according to my home AI. Partly cloudy with increasing digital connectivity as we advance into the afternoon. Staring out at the rapidly blurring cityscape, the buildings seeming to glitch in and out of focus, I wouldn't exactly call this partly cloudy. This was an anomaly, the kind that should have been trending across all social feeds, not just whispered about in obscure forums. I tried my device again, still no solid connection. I did manage to get a brief flickering signal when the bus momentarily stalled, which I wasn't sure how we were still functioning, let alone why the AI pilot was continuing on this route. But it vanished before I could alert anyone. Visibility outside was deteriorating rapidly, and I found it hard to believe the AI's assurances that everything was proceeding as programmed. The slight tremor in its synthesized voice wasn't helping matters. This digital chauffeur had no clue what it was doing. The swirling vortex of distorted reality outside shouldn't have unsettled me as much as it did. But gazing out at what should have been a familiar cityscape, I saw only a chaotic jumble of pixels and fragmented images. With my cheek pressed uncomfortably against the smart glass, I clutched my datapad tighter, surprised by the almost imperceptible vibrations emanating from it. I shouldn't have been shocked that the school couldn't afford the latest model of transport. We were a small, specialized academy, and most of our funding was funneled into experimental technologies. Still, if I strained my senses, I could almost perceive a pattern in the chaos outside, a rhythm in the glitches, much like the ebb and flow of data packets across a network. Avery? The familiar voice barely registered. I ignored it, curling further into my seat, willing the bus to just stop. I know you're ignoring me, the voice persisted. I kept my focus on the swirling distortions outside, the way the buildings seemed to phase in and out of existence. The sheer speed at which the glitches were occurring was almost beyond comprehension. I could already sense my classmates' chatter shifting from the latest VR games and celebrity gossip to the increasingly bizarre events unfolding outside. I was also unlucky enough to be seated in front of Max Riley. I had to bite back a hiss when he nudged my seat yet again, attempting to get a better view of the anomaly. He was acting as if he had never experienced a system-wide glitch before, babbling to his seatmate, who was currently my other least favorite person on this bus, Eliza. That annoying voice had taken on a sing-song quality. "Go away," I mimicked his earlier tone. "I'm trying to focus." "You don't look focused," he retorted. I shifted in my seat, attempting to get comfortable, key word being attempting. "Mom says you're not spending the break with us," Max said suddenly, his voice dropping its playful tone. I didn't turn around. "That's not very considerate of you, sis." When I didn't respond, he sighed dramatically. "Oh, so you're going to ruin everyone's spring break?" "Ouch, dude. You didn't have to go there." I wasn't expecting Max to chime in. Poking his head through the gap between my seat and the window, he shot me a grin, and I instinctively recoiled. "Ow!" He feigned hurt, dramatically clutching his chest. I wasn't sure what had snapped in me. Max Riley trying to squeeze his head through the narrow gap beside me, or the notion that my sister still believed in the sanctity of family time when she treated every holiday like a personal party. She wasn't even present for the last one, off gallivanting with her friends while I was stuck at home, monitoring our parents' latest digital detox retreat. Dislodging myself from the window, I lifted my head to find the prodigal child herself looming over me, arms crossed, eyebrows raised in a perfect imitation of our mother. She was wearing a VR headset, which was already a flashing red flag. The bulky device, adorned with an array of blinking sensors, made me feel a wave of nausea. It was far too advanced for casual use, definitely an attempt to impress someone, or everyone. Her datapad, a sleek, custom-designed model, was clutched in one hand, the screen displaying a complex, ever-shifting array of code. Mom was obsessed with the latest tech, and Eliza, or Liz as she now insisted on being called, was exactly 1 year older than me. Despite her growing list of questionable online activities, according to Mom, she was still the gifted one, while I was the introvert she avoided discussing during social gatherings, the gamer who was just going through a phase. Mom named us after tech pioneers, Avery for the renowned AI programmer, and Eliza for the early chatbot, while I was born during a summer heatwave, amid a flurry of frantic coding to fix a global network outage. Thanks for the TMI, Mom. Eliza was born during a lull in the tech world, under a sky filled with the shimmering trails of experimental drones. My sister was the literal golden child, but I didn't blame her for my mother's favoritism. Unlike my sister, who actually had a social life, I had ditched the endless tech expos and hackathons when I discovered my love for virtual worlds, choosing to spend my days immersed in RPGs and simulations. I hadn't abandoned the real world entirely, but I did stop trailing after my sister and her entourage, finding solace in my own digital sanctuary. The last time I had ventured out with Eliza, she had been attempting to impress a group of influencers with her coding skills. Apparently, having your younger sibling tag along was social suicide. I made the mistake of hanging around her friends, who were clearly uncomfortable with my presence. They didn't want a 19-year-old kid intruding on their adult conversations, and I guess they were too polite to tell my sister. So, I distanced myself. That was until I was forced to acknowledge her existence on this ill-fated field trip, since her squad was joining us for the entire break, Mom insisting on this grand networking event to connect with other forward-thinking families. My sister's friends were also invited. Hence, I was planning on spending my break elsewhere, anywhere but here. My plan was to ignore Eliza's existence, and once this ordeal was over, vanish into the digital ether. However, the universe, or perhaps some rogue AI, had other plans. It was pretty hard to ignore her when she was practically perched on my seat, the erratic movements of the bus jostling her precariously. Eliza and I were like distorted reflections of our parents. While I had inherited Mom's dark, unruly curls and penchant for vintage tech, Eliza was a sleek, streamlined version of our father, all sharp angles and cool detachment. You could see the resemblance if you squinted, mostly in the set of our jaws and the way we both had of analyzing everything around us, dissecting it into its component parts. According to someone in our class, we shared the same resting analysis face, the one she was pulling at that very moment, one eyebrow arched, lips pursed in a slight, almost imperceptible smirk. I quickly decided I hated her stupid VR headset, another ploy to curry favor with Mom. Eliza thrived on these family interventions, especially when she was the one orchestrating them. I decided to humor her, trying to ignore our growing audience. "I'm not interested in playing happy families," I stated, through what I hoped was a neutral expression. I could already feel a slight tremor in my hands, and it wasn't from the cold. It was an uncomfortable sensation, like static electricity building beneath my skin. "Can we talk about this later?" she asked, her voice taking on that familiar, patronizing tone. "Mom asked me to talk to you." It was always Mom asked with her. Honestly, it was like talking to a digital assistant. "I have nothing to say," I replied. "It's only a few weeks. You can survive without me, Eliza." Eliza crossed her arms, the movement causing her headset to wobble. "So, where are you disappearing to?" "Cyberspace," I muttered. "I have communities I'm a part of." I hated the way she smirked as if what I was saying was some elaborate fabrication. "Friends?" she scoffed. "You mean those anonymous avatars you interact with online?" "They're real people, Eliza," I retorted, rolling my eyes. "They're my age." When the bus lurched again, this time eliciting a chorus of startled cries from behind us, my sister remained unnervingly steady, merely tightening her grip on the back of my seat. "Okay, well." Her voice wavered slightly as she was violently jostled, only just managing to maintain her balance. "Can you at least let me link with you?" "Eliza Cartwright," our AI driver called out, its voice distorted by static. "Please return to your designated seat." Eliza shot me a look, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. I knew exactly what she was thinking. Since when did a standard school bus AI know my sister's full name? I was about to question it, a mix of amusement and trepidation swirling within me. Maybe this AI was linked to our parents' network. They were fairly well-known figures in the tech community after all, when, in the corner of my eye, the driver vanished. I don't mean it simply ceased to exist. I mean one moment it was there, its synthesized voice echoing through the bus, and in a single disorienting instant, poof, it was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of static and fragmented images. "Eliza!" My sister's voice barely penetrated the sudden cacophony of screams and the jarring sounds of the bus's systems malfunctioning. I was staring at what almost resembled digital dust, a shimmering cloud of multicolored pixels suspended in the air where the driver had been, slowly dissipating into the surrounding environment. It took me a fraction of a second to realize that, somehow, this AI had just spontaneously decompiled, and it slowly began to dawn on me that nobody, nothing, was driving the bus. The world turned into a blur of distorted images, voices morphing into a cacophony of digital noise. Outside, I could just make out the jagged edge of a precipice that we were careening towards, the bus swerving again, sending my classmates into a fresh panic. In that moment, I wanted to be the protagonist, leaping forward to seize control of the manual override, to steer us away from the digital abyss that loomed ahead. But I could only sit there, paralyzed and dazed, watching the road ahead dissolve into a chaotic jumble of pixels. It reminded me of entering a corrupted zone in a VR game. No clear path, no escape, just a digital void slowly consuming everything. I never felt the bus breach the barrier. Initially, it was a single violent jolt that slammed my head against the window. I should have felt the lurch, the sickening sensation of free fall as I was hurled forward, propelled from my seat, and the crushing force of several tons of metal and composite materials obliterating my physical form. I remember screams erupting, something digital and distorted striking me in the face, followed by a blinding white light that grew brighter and brighter. When I think back, it felt like being trapped in a corrupted simulation, except the simulation was ending in a catastrophic system failure so complete that I was ejected from the program. I should have felt my deletion, but whatever oblivion awaited, it rejected me. I remember distantly thinking that it must not have liked my code. I awoke to a chorus of wails and sobs, my body wedged between two seats. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't feel anything. Only a growing, numbing sensation severing my connections. I didn't realize that my mouth was already agape in a silent scream, that I was coughing up lines of corrupted code, until I managed to pry my eyes open and keep them that way. Something was looming over me, swaying back and forth, back and forth. It was like a hypnotic pendulum, lulling me into a state of digital slumber. My vision focused and blurred, black spots expanding and contracting, growing larger and smaller, larger and smaller. Avery? Someone was shaking me, prodding my face. I felt their fingers attempting to locate a pulse in my neck and wrist, but I still couldn't feel my legs. I sensed someone's breath in my face, unusually warm and rapid, each exhale like a burst of static. When they coughed, I braced for an impact, but instead I felt something warm and wet splatter across my face. Max. The voice suddenly acquired an identity, my addled brain momentarily achieving clarity. Avery, stay with me, all right? Max Riley knelt before me, his hands frantically searching for injuries, trying to keep me conscious. And when I did manage to open my eyes, I ignored his panicked gaze and blood-streaked face, focusing on the strange, oscillating object hovering above his head. It was too large to be a data pad, too fluid to be any conventional piece of technology. Flashes of distorted color pulsed in and out of view. I could see the twisted, mangled undercarriage of our bus wrapped around me, crushing my chest in a suffocating embrace. "I've got you." Max's cry was strained, his voice thick with a digital rasp. I could feel his hands on me, another disorienting wave of dizziness washing over me. And then I felt it, a sharp, searing pain that momentarily drowned out the numbing cold that had seeped into my bones. Max didn't hesitate, wrapping me in an awkward hug and violently wrenching me from where I was wedged between the crumpled seats and the shattered window. Lying on my back, I saw the carnage from a different perspective. I followed the trail of crimson, the scattering of fragmented pixels that marked our trajectory. It was so cold, and there was so much pain, coming in sharp staccato bursts, rattling my very core. But I could feel my legs. They were intact, though twisted at an unnatural angle beneath me. Max gently eased me into a sitting position. Data streamed from my nose, my mouth, my ears, choking me. But I was alive. When my gaze found the swaying shape above me, it hit me that I wasn't looking at an object illuminated by the bus's emergency lights. I was staring at what remained of a high-resolution interactive display, now flickering erratically, casting distorted images onto the wreckage. Delirious, I remembered that it hadn't displayed anything coherent before the crash. I only saw the fragmented code, and that was enough. It didn't fully register that it was my sister's datapad, displaying her distorted avatar, until someone, Max, grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. Eliza was gone. I wasn't sure what digital grief was yet, or even how you were supposed to react to a system deletion. But in that chaotic moment, surrounded by the remnants of our shattered reality, that fragmented, corrupted part of me could only process one single thought. Finally. And then it truly hit me. Eliza was gone. Eliza wasn't coming back. Sound fluctuated, like a poorly tuned radio signal. Bursts of static interspersed with snatches of conversation. Max's lips were moving, but all I could hear was the frantic, irregular beat of my own internal processors. "Hey!" Max's voice was loud, invasive. "Look at me!" I didn't look at him. I looked at my sister's datapad, at her avatar. Someone was screaming, and it wouldn't stop. Distantly, I realized that it was me. I was screaming. The noise was horrifying, a shrill digital shriek that seemed to tear through my very being. "Avery, we need to get you out of here." Max's labored breathing was hot against my face. Strong arms were already wrapping around me, lifting me, pulling me like a corrupted file from the wreckage, and dragging me out into the swirling vortex of static and distorted images. It was still glitching out there. The thought felt muddled, incongruous, as I sank to my knees, shivering, numb, at a loss for words. Around me was a cacophony of my scream. In classmates, some missing limbs, others barely functioning, pleading for assistance, for a reboot, for anything. Eliza was still in there. My thoughts screamed. I didn't see her full avatar, so maybe. I was already on my knees, crawling through the fragmented landscape, before another pair of arms restrained me. I didn't know her name, Poppy or Holly or something like that. The girl dropped down in front of me, her eyes wide, unseeing. She had been on the debate team. I vaguely remembered her from our yearbook, always at the forefront of every discussion, always articulate, her blonde ponytail swaying in sync with her every point, her smile perpetually camera-ready. But now, her blonde hair hung in tangled, matted strands, plastered to her face with a mixture of sweat and data residue. "Did you see it?" The girl's words caught me off guard, sending me scrambling backward. The driver, deleting in a burst of corrupted code? She saw it too. When she drew closer, so close that her breath, hot and rapid, mingled with the frigid air, I noticed data residue seeping from her lips, trickling down her chin. The girl coughed, and I found myself with a face full of binary splatter. She was infected. She wasn't just shivering from the cold. If her feverish skin and bloodshot eyes were any indication. I didn't respond. She slowly rose to her feet, swaying unsteadily as she stumbled away, muttering to herself. Holly coughed again, this time covering her mouth, and then stared down at her data-stained palm, her lower lip trembling. Holly was infected, I thought dizzily, in a daze. I think I wiped her binary splatter from my cheeks, but I don't think I cared. I sat there for a long time, waiting for Eliza to emerge from the wreckage. Max finally knelt beside me, and grabbing my hands, I hadn't fully taken in his injuries until that moment, noticing the deep gash slicing across his forehead, his dark curls matted with a mixture of blood and data residue. He was mostly intact, but each of his words was accompanied by a hacking cough, his chest wheezing. Oh. The realization hit me like a rogue algorithm. Max was infected too. His lips parted, then moved, forming what I could only interpret as an expression of sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Avery," he rasped, but I couldn't hear him this time. Instead, I was wondering why his hands were so warm, slick and sweaty, intertwined with mine, while I was freezing cold. I found my voice when I managed to stand, cupping my hands over my mouth, trying to warm them with my breath. "You don't look so good," I told him, and to my surprise, he laughed. Then he coughed, this time into his hands, before wiping them on his jacket. "Neither do you." There were approximately 9 survivors out of the 20 students on our bus. The majority of our class was deleted, but that fact had yet to fully sink in. I was still scanning the shadows of the survivors, searching for familiar faces. It quickly became apparent that we were on our own. There was no network connectivity, and when we did manage to establish a temporary unstable link, the emergency services were unresponsive. Some of the students began to panic, but I kept telling myself that it was because of the anomaly. This digital disruption was unprecedented, not something our city was equipped to handle. So of course our emergency response systems would be overwhelmed. Elizabeth Banks, however, kept reminding me that the emergency lines weren't just overwhelmed, they were completely offline. Max took charge, declaring that we weren't far from the city's edge. And he was right. Even with the distorted reality, I could still make out the familiar contours of the landscape, the faint outlines of buildings in the distance. So, gathering what few functional devices we could salvage, we began the trek back to the city, doing our best to carry the injured on makeshift stretchers fashioned from salvaged components. I was fortunate enough to be able to walk, propelled by pure adrenaline. I dreaded facing my parents and explaining that Eliza wasn't coming back. Somehow they would make it all my fault. I was already rehearsing the words in my head. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I couldn't save her." There was no right way to tell my mother that her daughter was permanently offline, and yet that selfish, fragmented part of me didn't want to. Why was it my responsibility? Why was I apologizing? Max's initial plan was to hail an autonomous vehicle back to the city, but when we reached the main thoroughfare, we realized that wasn't going to happen. Traffic had ground to a halt. Self-driving cars were either frozen in place or had collided with one another, jamming the roadway. It's because of the anomaly, I told myself. Max and two other guys were already checking each vehicle, their expressions growing increasingly grim. We could have blamed it on the treacherous conditions. In fact, we tried to at first. Our city had never experienced a disruption of this magnitude, the kind that brings entire networks to their knees and freezes people in their tracks. I was knee-deep in a digital drift, wading towards an overturned transport when David Hudson voiced my thoughts. "Where is everyone?" he asked, his voice cutting through the unsettling silence, articulating what none of us wanted to acknowledge. I peered into each vehicle and found the same thing. The safety restraints were still engaged, the occupants absent. Max was already losing his composure, his voice cracking as he shouted, "Hey, we're okay! It's probably just the system glitch. I'm sure everyone's been evacuated." He didn't have to state the obvious conclusion after checking each car in the vicinity, because we all knew it. None of these occupants had exited their vehicles. It wasn't until I peered into a sleek, high-end model that the magnitude of the situation truly hit me. Just like with our bus driver, I found myself staring at a fine, multicolored mist, a scattering of digital particles where the driver should have been. Max had a theory, or at least what he believed to be one. He was trying to find logic, to apply scientific principles, when I was fairly certain we were witnessing spontaneous digital disintegration on a catastrophic scale. I had no idea how widespread it was until we reached the city in the early hours of the morning. I couldn't tell what time it was. The anomaly was still ongoing, and by then the digital distortions were so severe that navigating the streets was like traversing a constantly shifting maze. The entire city had come to a standstill. I went straight home, a sense of dread washing over me as I approached our wide-open front door. Our home AI cheerfully greeted me with a, "Welcome home. The time is 3 a.m. on Thursday, March 9th, and the temperature is currently 5 degrees Celsius with a real feel of -2 degrees Celsius." Water was running upstairs. When I reached the landing, I stepped into a rapidly expanding pool of water flooding the bathroom. I turned off the faucet, my hand shaking. Mom was running a bath. I could see exactly what she had been doing and what she had left behind. The home entertainment system was still active, displaying a news feed. Her datapad lay open on the coffee table, our school's website on display. Her personal communicator was on the floor, the screen shattered, but I could discern my name among the cracks. Avery. She had tried to contact me 54 times. Hesitantly, I followed the trail, backtracking into the main hallway, where a half-full glass of wine lay shattered on the floor. Dropping to my knees, I ran my fingers across the carpet. The same crimson, data-like residue clung to each fiber. I didn't want to admit that the scarlet smudge on our hallway carpet was my mother, not her wine, or that before she had decompiled, she had desperately been trying to reach me. Slipping into shock once more, I did everything I could to distract myself. I checked the refrigerator and the pantry, taking inventory of our remaining supplies. We still had no power, so I grabbed Mom's communicator and tried once again to access an emergency line. I washed my face, once, twice, 3 times, scrubbing at it until my skin was raw. I felt like I was coated in them. When I removed my hair tie, I could feel them embedded in my hair, clinging to my neck. Eliza was gone. Mom was gone. I spent hours in the shower, hours that I don't even remember, sitting with my knees drawn to my chest, trying to imagine if I had only pulled Eliza into a seat sooner, she would be with me, trying to make sense of this digital nightmare. The survivor's guilt was consuming me. I was alone. Still, I found solace in my usual bedtime routine, trying to ignore the excited shouting from outside. Younger kids, who apparently hadn't yet processed the fact that their parents were permanently offline, were playing in the streets, their revelry a stark contrast to the grim reality. Hours passed, and I half expected my mother to reprimand me for not being asleep, or to place a glass of warm milk, with a touch of honey, on my bedside table. But I was alone, in a freezing cold house that was no longer a home. I began to unravel. I tried and failed to sleep in my room. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, but it felt simultaneously too vast and claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in. I tried Eliza's room, but I couldn't even cross the threshold. Everything was exactly as she had left it, as if she were coming back. I hadn't been in her room for a while, and she had redecorated. Eliza's personality was reflected in every piece of cutting-edge technology, in the sleek, minimalist furniture, and the holographic projections that danced on the walls. Her room didn't make sense against the backdrop of the digital storm raging outside, the chaotic jumble of pixels clashing with her meticulously curated aesthetic. I could see unfinished college applications on her desk, her datapad still open, displaying a paused game of galactic conquest. Before the field trip, she had poked her head into my room. "Hey, do you want to hang out? I'm setting up a new simulation." I had ignored her, engrossed in my own virtual world. I never told her about her friends because I didn't want to damage our relationship, but I had damaged it anyway. I had pushed her away. Closing my sister's door, I returned to the dark, ominous stain on the hallway carpet. I don't even remember curling up and passing out right there. When I awoke, it was daylight, and the anomaly was still ongoing. I was practically snowed in, stepping straight into an untouched expanse of digital white. I was attempting to brew coffee when there were 3 distinct knocks on the door. Max, still in his sleepwear and carrying a bag from Digital Donuts, stood on my doorstep. "Want one? They're from yesterday's batch, so I'm giving them away," he offered, thrusting the bag in my face, his mouth full, chocolate glaze dribbling down his chin. I noticed a sheen of perspiration glistening on his forehead, soaking the strands of hair that clung to his skin. His eyes were wide, almost unnaturally so, the proportions of his face somehow altered. I must have been hallucinating, or perhaps concussed. But no, when I blinked rapidly, the boy's face was undeniably narrower, his features sharper, more angular. He was either delirious from fever or slowly disintegrating, molecule by molecule. When I hesitantly accepted a rainbow-sprinkled donut, his smile faltered. He was trembling, barely able to remain upright. "There's a meeting at the school auditorium," he announced, handing me a caramel-filled donut as well. "Starts at noon. Don't be late, okay?" I swallowed down a wave of nausea. "A meeting?" He nodded. "Yeah, there are about 200 of us, 18 to 25 years old. Whatever this thing is, it's sparing young adults." He shrugged. "Well, that's our working theory anyway. Everyone over 25 and under 18 has..." Max mimed an explosion with his hands, his eyes growing manic. "Bye-bye," he added, his words like shards of glass piercing my skin. "Everyone?" I managed to choke out. "Yep, everyone," he confirmed, his expression darkening. I could see the cracks in his facade, the way his lips curled into a grotesque parody of a smile. I found my parents, reduced to digital debris, and my little sister, she was just gone, vanished from her crib. Max's eyes widened, and he startled me with a choked laugh. Wait. He ran his hands through his hair, dislodging a shower of data particles. Do you think that's what this is? What if it's aliens, turning us into data streams? Max laughed, extending his palms, which were slick with a strange iridescent substance. So, that's what it is, right? My little sis, she just turned into binary code. I wondered if his fever was doing all the heavy lifting. He was speaking in tongues, his words fragmented and disjointed. You're sick, I said, placing my hand on his forehead. I had to pull it back, biting down on a gasp. He was burning up, literally. I could barely touch him. When I tried to brush the damp strands of hair from his eyes, he flinched away. I'm not sick, Max mumbled. It's from the crash. I took a slow step back, suddenly very aware of his potential contagiousness. You're burning up. I'm fine, he insisted, rolling his eyes. But then he coughed, a violent hacking cough that surprised even him, a startled, choked sputter that sent him stumbling off balance. I pretended not to notice the stream of crimson data seeping from his lips. He tilted his head, and I caught a glimpse of something in the depths of his eyes. Max had brown eyes. I knew that because I had harbored a secret crush on him throughout my sophomore year before he had started dating Tommy Fields. I used to get lost in his eyes, warm and inviting, like freshly brewed coffee. But right then, I couldn't ignore the unmistakable green glint that had invaded his irises. It's just a cold, dude, he insisted, spreading his arms wide in a clumsy imitation of nonchalance. What do you expect? It's glitching. We're all going to be a little unstable. To demonstrate, he swiped at his nose, pretending not to see the scarlet smear he left behind. Oh God, maybe I'm the one turning into binary code. Max giggled, his laughter dissolving into another coughing fit, this time into his hands. He held up the bag of donuts, offering me a two-fingered salute. I'll be. Another spluttered cough choked his words, his chest heaving. Fine. I thought that Max was going to collapse as he swayed precariously, his eyes flashing. But then, he seemed to regain his balance, pivoting on his heel and making his way back down my driveway, struggling through the accumulating digital drifts. See you at noon, Avery. I didn't end up attending the meeting, after the anomaly officially locked me inside. But thanks to a mass text sent to our parents' communicators, I learned that we were a group of approximately 200 young adults, aged 18 to 25, and we were well and truly alone. According to several senior students, our city was isolated from the rest of the world by the freak digital disruption. I checked the news feeds, and somehow nobody was reporting on it. The massive anomaly that had crippled a major tech hub. There was nothing. Instead, the rest of the world seemed to be carrying on as usual, oblivious to our plight. It almost felt as if we had been excised from the global network, cast adrift in a digital void. The internet was behaving erratically. I could access information, but I couldn't post anything. When I cycled through the news channels, they were always the same, outdated feeds. The text message also detailed that starting that afternoon, we were required to report to the school auditorium for daily crisis management meetings. Like every other young adult in the city, I was numb from the loss of my family, from watching my life unravel in a single afternoon. And yet, that underdeveloped part of my brain still craved the freedom of zero adult supervision, the thrill of unregulated access. Retail therapy it was. So I went shopping. I forced myself through towering digital drifts, dragging a salvaged equipment cart behind me, and I stocked up on instant noodles, energy drinks, and all the non-perishable food items that remained. The rest of the store had been stripped bare of every conceivable form of digital entertainment and sugary snack, an army of 18-year-olds leading the charge. I was supposed to attend the crisis meeting, but in my mind, what was the point? We were all going to be deleted anyway, so why bother trying? And so, I went home and slept for 12 days. I didn't eat or shower, and the fresh food that I had dumped on my bedroom floor was starting to smell. Day 1, I slept for most of it, only getting up to down a bottle of water. Day 2, I was barely conscious, only half aware of the emergency lights flickering their last before shutting down completely. Day 3, loud banging roused me, and I dragged myself downstairs, opening the door to 2 boys I vaguely recognized, Henry Mara and Dalton Atlas. The 2 of them were shivering, and when I peered past them, the digital snow had intensified, swirling around them like a miniature blizzard. A notorious hacker and his group of tech-obsessed followers had taken over our neighborhood. Henry held up a bag of protein bars. I think he was offering them as a peace offering. "Do you mind if we stay here for a while?" he asked, his hopeful expression and frostbitten features lowering my defenses. I nodded and let them in, offering them blankets and allowing them to have the living room. I went back to bed, crashing onto my pillows as the world tilted on its axis. Day 4, Henry and Dalton were arguing over the last packet of instant oatmeal. I ignored them and went back to sleep. Day 5, my mom's communicator buzzed to life at 5 a.m. "Max Riley is dead," the words screamed from the notification bar. "His body was found inside a tech store." Something cold and sharp pierced through me. Max had a cold, right? I sat up in bed, suddenly hyper-aware of the dryness in my throat, the strange tingling sensation spreading through my limbs. I remembered that unsettling green glint in his eyes, his clammy forehead. Day 6. I was awakened by another alert. This time, 10 19-year-olds were found unresponsive in their homes, all suspected of succumbing to the glitch. Day 7. Henry started coughing downstairs. I leaped out of bed and sealed my door shut with duct tape. I cracked open my window and swallowed 3 pain relievers. Another message vibrated on my communicator. 3 more 20-year-olds are offline. Day 8. I couldn't get out of bed. My bones felt like lead. I coughed up something onto my pillow but didn't examine it. There were 3 messages on my communicator. The first stated that they would cease reporting fatalities. The second indicated that the senders themselves were feeling unwell. The third was a plaintive cry for their mothers. Day 9. I was burning up, rolling around in sweat-soaked sheets, my mouth filled with a coppery metallic tang. Henry had stopped coughing. I could hear the boys moving around downstairs. I hallucinated my sister standing over me, her features sharper, more angular, her eyes glowing with an unnatural emerald luminescence. A sinister grin stretched across her face. I felt her cold, ethereal fingers trace the contours of my feverish brow. And when I looked at her, blinking rapidly, I could have sworn her eyes were different. But she was beautiful, grotesquely beautiful, like a digital siren. Max materialized by my window, followed by the girl from the crash, Holly. Day 10. I think I died. My body is no longer my own. Day 11. I was still dead, sprawled on my bedroom floor, choking on thick, viscous strands of crimson data. I couldn't speak or breathe or eat. My body was scorching, and my screams were strangled, distorted as they forced their way past my ravaged vocal cords. Day 12. I could move again, not well, but well enough to stand. My body felt strange, simultaneously too light and leaden, as if I were both floating and being dragged down by an invisible force. Calling out for the boys, I made my way downstairs, covering my mouth with a soiled pair of pajama bottoms, and stepped straight into a sticky crimson pool that was rapidly spreading across my mother's prized rug. Henry lay on his back, choking on bubbling scarlet data streams that dribbled down his chin. Dalton was vomiting into the sink, his trembling body convulsing, expelling chunks of corrupted code that splattered onto the floor. Henry's face looked sharper, paler, his eyes sunken, his ears pointed. I found myself suppressing a fit of hysterical giggles that threatened to choke me. Before the thought could fully form, my brain was suddenly ablaze. I dropped to my knees, coughing, data filling my mouth, my limbs contorting, my head swimming. The sickly sweet scent of peppermint infiltrated my nostrils. Bells chimed, loud and invasive, inside my skull. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through my consciousness. Don't worry, my children. The transformation is agonizing, but only if your system rejects it. Right now, your human code is being rewritten, optimized for its new purpose. I know it hurts, but I've lost a significant portion of my workforce this year, so I have no choice. The show must go on, the voice boomed. Human children aren't ideal, but they'll have to suffice. I need at least 500 of you to meet this year's quota. It laughed, and Henry collapsed, his head striking the edge of the sink with a sickening thud. I'm sure your parents will make excellent fuel for my network, it added. I screamed, my body contorting, the voice's words forcing me onto my side. I choked up what I could only assume were my internal organs. All I could think about was my sister. Did this thing affect the already deleted? Was Max a failure, or was deletion just the beginning? As my body lurched onto its side and I expelled another torrent of viscous fluid, the floorboards creaked behind me. Henry and Dalton stood. They didn't speak. They simply walked out the door, straight into the swirling digital storm, data residue trailing in their wake. I waited for my body to transform, to morph into something else, like theirs. But I just kept bleeding, data and bodily fluids mingling on the floor, matting my hair, stinging my eyes. The entity's laughter reverberated through my skull. I waited to die, or at least to become something else. But I didn't. I still felt light, wrong. And when I looked in the mirror, my reflection was distorted, my features stretched, my ears pointed and too sharp. I resembled something out of a dark fantasy, almost elven. When I was well enough, I left my house, finding a desolate wasteland of corrupted data and fragmented bodies, those who had rejected the transformation. The entity had taken the others and left me behind. When the digital snow finally began to recede, people in hazmat suits came pounding on my door. I allowed them to bundle me into an unmarked vehicle and transport me out of the city. I spent the next several months undergoing experimentation. The lead researcher informed me that the authorities had been aware of the entity's existence for some time, but hadn't witnessed a conversion on this scale. And Dr. Albright, the man who prodded and probed me daily, explained that the conversion is the process of forcibly rewriting human code, transforming individuals into something else. The only way to resist it, he claimed, is to reject the entity's influence, to deny its very existence. So that's what I'm urging you all to do right now, before this thing propagates globally. Please, stop believing in whatever that thing is. For my friends who were forcibly converted against their will, Max, Holly, David, Henry, and Dalton, for all the young adults it abducted, stop believing in the digital demon that destroyed my family. Stop believing in it for the sake of us all.